So I'm going to set the stage for the next 5 months of artist talks and and this class that produced some incredible bodies of work. This class is something that I have taught at LACP. It's called Personal Project for 10 years. And photographers come to the class wanting to make a new body of work. But it's not just about making the work, it's about considering the articulation of the work. It's considering all the things that surround your work, your bio, your website, everything that makes you look professional. I also asked all of the participants to create artist talks, which was timely because, for instance, Ellen Friedlander is now giving artist talks right and left, and it was a preparation. You never know when you prepare for something that's not there yet, oftentimes it shows up. And I also encouraged people to make books about their projects. But 2020 was no ordinary year. So I'm going to read my opening statement about this year. In January 2020, when the world was blissfully unaware of the devastating global transformation that would impact every corner of our lives, a group of photographers met for a year-long masterclass under the tutelage of me. Here, each would develop a personal photographic project that would ultimately be exhibited at the Los Angeles Center of Photography in early 2021. And I can't tell you how exciting those openings are. It's an experience that totally bonds the group. We are in it together. We work on the press and the promotion. We learn about writing press releases and then share in this amazing experience of exhibiting together. But this year, last year, the group only met twice in person, once in January and once in February 2020. And then, as we know, the train went off the rails. We finally, so for so many of us, the idea of self-quarantining had dual realities. We finally had more time to be creative, but the impact of the virus, the pain of social unrest, and the country appearing to lose its moral compass, at times brought a sense of malaise and futility to our efforts. We had moved into uncharted waters with no map to keep us on course. And I just want to describe to you, as an educator, for a class that met at 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. at night, I would look out over a sea of darkened rooms, many participants in bed, barely able to get through the class. And how do you encourage this group to move forward in making work? So some of the photographers continued to create work started at the beginning of the year, but now with new considerations of isolation and loss. Others careened off course into innovative ways of thinking and seeing the world and developed whole new projects. As our city emptied and its streets emptied, we got to know Los Angeles in new ways, noticing the architecture, flora, and fauna that had been overlooked or underappreciated. 2020 became a year of self and global reconsideration, looking inward with the opportunity to reset and re-see our lives, but also looking outward with a profound sense of our mortality. So the best way to describe this journey is quite simply the year of not knowing, which is also our virtual exhibition's title. I mean, some of it was practical. I would email Brandon and say, is the exhibition on? Is it happening? We just didn't know what our future was as a group and how we were going to exhibit the work. This roller coaster year made us better somehow. working together on a common goal, offering support and good humor, and ultimately fanning the creative sparks. The result is we made it to the finish line. The year of not knowing is a historical marker of this moment in time, with insightful individual projects that speak to gratitude, anxiety, memory, place, and simply being human. So, since we won't be having an in-person exhibition in a gallery in our beautiful LACP space, we instead created a website that is our exhibition, and a series of artist talks to share our projects, and a collaborative book called The Year of Not Knowing. So huge kudos. Let me get to screen share. I just jumped out of there for a second. Huge kudos to the amazing Sally Field, thankfully in our class, who is an incredible graphic designer, website designer, artist, and she makes everyone look good. She created this amazing website for our exhibition with the 15 artists. Now, normally I don't show my own work in the exhibition, but sort of at the last minute, one of the students moved to a different part of California. And so I stepped in as the 15th person. And it's great because it allowed me to share the work that I was making during this period of time. So I encourage you to explore the site, explore the projects, and you will be learning from the artists over the next 4 months and tonight about the impetus of the work and etc. So another component of this incredible year of making art in such a profound time was that we wanted to do something collaborative with each other. And so let me get out of this and get onto this. And so we decided to create a book. And I think I'm on the last page, so please excuse me while okay, I'm going to go out of that for a second. Sorry, guys. I have too many elements here. Okay. And we will start again. Okay. Okay. During the pandemic, we were considering ways to respond to this moment in time as a collaborative effort. We were inspired by an article in the New York Times written by Larry Smith about challenging people to describe their worlds in 6 words, a form he calls the 6-word memoir. As visual artists, we took the challenge even further, creating visual descriptions to accompany our carefully chosen 6 words. The photographs were created while we were self-quarantining in Los Angeles. The result is a collection of responses to one of the most difficult years in our lifetimes. Again, this is a historical document of our collected experiences as we navigated this grave new world. Each artist worked independently, not sharing their output with anyone else. And when we sequenced the book, we discovered wonderful connections between the words and images. After seeing this book, if you are interested, it can be purchased through MagCloud at a very reasonable price. Jason will put that in the chat. So this is the year of not knowing in 6 words. And I hope you take a look at Sally's wonderful graphic for our title. She's hidden the number 2020 within the year of not knowing. I just love that. So the world has definitely gone sideways when my world went upside down. This world is unnatural to me. Looking ahead, looking back, looking ahead. The common became strange, became common. We played everything we possibly could. My hair grew, I cut it. I had no idea you did. Quiet announcement of another shrouded day. This one night turned into many. Once in a blue moon, Halloween. Can't see the forest from the trees. Seeing things that were always there, every flower on my walk today. I savored this moment in time. Can you still smell the coffee? Lovers we kiss through our masks. We keep looking for the beauty. We long for touch and connection. Parents, no hugs, no goodbye kisses. Pandemic advice coming from all directions. Stoic, still trying to stand strong. Traveling when no one else is. Discarded, all travel has been canceled. Keep your nose under your mask. Thank goodness for the essential businesses. Zoomed out, virtual life is exhausting. Even the dogs beg for privacy. Holly's Roadkill Saloon, no masks allowed. Backyards become front yards, boundaries are everywhere. He refuses to wear a mask, cash only and face mask required. Small towns, small minds, no masks. I will vote for any Democrat. American Dream, the streets of LA. We say his name, George Floyd. Reckoning, gratitude, isolation, injustice, reflection, regeneration. Wake me when it's over. Where life goes, where life takes me, I go. After the plague came the Renaissance. This did not have to happen. Beauty is still present in death. So that was our communal effort in creating something as a group. And I love this book. And as I say, it is a historical document. It's something that I hope to show my grandchildren about this moment in time. So if you know my work, you know that probably about 60% of my work is portraiture. But one part of my interest in portraiture has always been the idea of what is revealed and what is concealed, especially in wearing masks. I love masks. I love Halloween. I love the idea of that you can tell more universal stories when you don't see the actual person. And my wonderful children always allowed me to try on various masks. Even my dog got into the idea of mask wearing and was a wonderful model for me. I used a lot of transparent masks because I felt like this allowed me to tell stories and show a photograph of someone without making it specific to that person. I have, a lot of my work has moments where I'm obscuring the face of the model or the person in front of my lens. I don't work with models, so I should just say friends and family. And that led me to this image, which has hung over my desk for probably 20 years. And it got me thinking a lot about portraiture, about how I'm missing friends and family. And this was at a time in self-quarantining when we were really, really uptight about being around one another. And so in the dark days of strict self-quarantining, I felt a profound loss to my photographic portrait practice. In addition, a general malaise and sense of isolation. With the mandate to wear masks, I considered not only the loss of identity with faces obscured by swaths of fabric, but the loss of connectivity with friends and family. I thought about the historical legacy of wearing masks in cultures all over the globe that allowed for storytelling and new personas, and it reminded me of the humorous paper bag mask created by illustrator Saul Steinberg, photographed by Ing Morath in the 1950s and 60s. I reached out to friends and family and presented my idea for a new series called Undercover. They would create their own paper bag masks and arrive at my backyard studio for a portrait session at a determined time. They would step onto the backdrop wearing their paper bags and wait. I would then appear in my own mask, shout instructions, which also often resulted in great hilarity, shoot quickly, and return to my house. And because I shoot film, I had no idea as to the results for a number of weeks. But what I wasn't expecting was that while wearing their masks, participants lost a particular self-consciousness that comes from performing for the camera, instead feeling a levity and elevated spirit from participating in an artful and fun activity. The end result revealed new sides to people I know well and documented how art can shift moods, even in the darkest of days. So I put this one in so you could see my setup in the backyard. This was very funky. I usually shot at about 4 p.m. in the afternoon, just when the winds would pick up, so the paper would rattle and move. You know, I was working with a lot of elements that were unfamiliar and not perfect, but I think that that felt right to the time. And for instance, I needed to move back so that I could have gotten her foot in the image, but it was a learning experience for all of us. And when I would tell one of the people to turn right or to turn left, they would turn the exact opposite direction. There was a lot of cute, as I say, confusion, but hilarity as we made these portraits, and really blown away by some of the masks that various friends and family made. So that's where I am with the project right now. I still want to do more. Sandra Klein's in the audience. Thank you for participating in this. You did such a beautiful job. I would love to add another 20 images to this, but I actually, I started this in early summer, I would say maybe May. And I stopped making the work when there was all of the social unrest. And I felt like this was not the time to put out anything with levity, that I really needed to be sensitive to what was going on in the world. And so I've held back on this work, and you really truly are the first group to see this work. I've put it a little bit on Instagram, but I haven't really put it out. And I do want to continue it, and I hope my LA friends will be inspired to create some wild outfit and mask to shoot. So so there is that. Now I would like to introduce our other two speakers tonight. And Kat Bawden is going to go next. Kat is an artist in Los Angeles whose work explores duality and liminal states such as trauma, gender, desire, and the subconscious. Her images and prose work together to create an immersive world with a unique sense of time. Her work is informed by her academic background in social science and public health, as well as her lived experience. In addition to her own art, Kat leads community storytelling projects with people in substance use recovery and teaches photography to middle and high school students. And she's really leaving a lot out of her bio here, but she has quite a remarkable history in photography. And I am so delighted to introduce Kat Bawden this evening. So Kat, take it away.
Thank you so much, Aline. That really means a lot to me. And so I want to thank you, and I want to thank LACP, the whole staff, for organizing this. I know these events don't just happen. There's a lot of effort that goes into this. And I just want to thank you all for continuing to support all of us artists all throughout the pandemic. You all have been so incredible at creating opportunities. So I just want to thank you, and thank you, Aline, for keeping all of us in the course connected and on track, even at 10 p.m. at night. So let me quick share my screen. All right, everyone can see that okay? I know that someday I'll be able to use Zoom without narrating every single step that I take, but that's just a dream for the future. So thank you all so much for having me. This is such a wonderful opportunity. And as Aline said, my work largely explores the mind. And I think my most profound and biggest artistic influence is my parents. My dad is a psychiatrist and my mom studied art in college, and they're both very intellectual and spiritual people. So growing up, we would talk about dreams, the subconscious, and the mysteries of the mind. And it informed in a really positive way how I see the world and human experience as something that's layered and full of mysteries and worth analyzing. And I also learned from them that both science and art can work together to explore the mysteries of human existence. So while growing up, I loved music videos. I would just watch them for hours. And I loved the way that music videos would create an entire universe with a storyline in such a short amount of time. And I think music videos were really the first time that I saw how the camera can be used to build an immersive world with its own logic and rules. And growing up, I also danced from when I was a young kid until I went to college. I studied ballet and modern dance. And through studying dance, I really learned how the physical form can express emotional experiences, and also how the audience can be brought into art as in a participatory role. And I today approach making photographs really as though I'm practicing a dance. I'll try a shot or an idea over and over and over again, even over the course of multiple days, until I feel like I've gotten it right. My academic background is in social science and public health, and I spent almost a decade as a community organizer and public health worker and teacher. And I left that work to pursue documentary with the hopes of creating social change through documentary storytelling. And I studied at the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University in their certificate program. And in this program, you learn the history of documentary making, but you also get a lot of exposure to contemporary documentary media. And this program also has a large emphasis on understanding the social context in which you're working as a documentarian and really understanding and articulating your personal connection to the subject matter. And in this program, I was really drawn to people who are kind of able to straddle both the documentary world as well as the art world. And the Latoya Ruby Frazier, whose work is on the screen now, was a huge influence for me. This is from her project, The Notion of Family, which was a 14-year-long project she did in her hometown of Braddock, Pennsylvania, which is a town in the Rust Belt. And in this project, she was documenting the effect of economic decline, both on the town as well as the effect on the Black community in that town and her family specifically. So she would photograph the town, but then also photograph her family through a lot of staged portraiture with her mother especially. And so in this image, this is a photograph of her and her mother, and you can see that the camera is actually in the image, and that plays a role in the story. The act of photographing is a part of the story. And it's such a powerful project and really affected me because it's engaging in critical conversations around power, economic opportunity, gender, race, and class, but it's also deeply personal. Another artist who has been really influential to me is Diana Markosian. She is a documentary photographer who wanted to tell the story of her family immigrating from post-Soviet Russia to Santa Barbara, California as a child. And her mother was a mail order bride and loved the 1980s soap opera Santa Barbara, and that had an influence on her choice to move to California. And so in honor of that, Diana, to tell this story, wrote a script from her mother's perspective, hired actors, made a film, and photographed these actors as they retraced her childhood. And so in this image, these are all actors. So this is an actress playing the photographer as a young girl and her mother as they wait in a line for bread after the fall of the Soviet Union. And it's such an incredible project. And this image is so special. You can really see the art history in it. It looks like a Renaissance painting. And so I was so impressed by the scope of this project, not just the cinematic and stylistic aspects, but the approach of incorporating memory and recreation and even fictionalization in telling this story. This is work by the artist Tara Krynak, who was born in Peru and adopted from an orphanage by an American family and raised in the US. And she's traveled extensively to Peru to explore her psychological heritage as a child who was born during a violent conflict in that country. And so in this image, she is projecting an image of a Peruvian woman in this village onto her. So she's like, it looks like she's physically walking into the image. And by doing this, she's positioning herself physically as being between these two worlds. And so all of these artists really showed to me how the medium of photography can be used to explore memory and relationships in a really creative way, and how you can have one foot in the documentary tradition and the other in a place of mystery and imagination. And in doing so, even get at a story or a feeling that could be in some ways more real than if it had been more of a straightforward documentary. So I was working as a freelance editorial and documentary photographer when, during a time of some extreme stress and a health crisis, I had a traumatic memory that resurfaced that had been repressed or kind of forgotten for almost 2 decades. And so I started photographing my body as a way of exploring this experience. At the time, I was really seeing my body, my brain, and my self-identity in a very new way. And I was seeing memory in a very new way. And I wanted to photograph myself as though I were like a still life, like almost like an examination. At the time, I was looking at a lot of Dutch and Flemish master painters and a lot of still lives. And I just love the coloring and the coldness and intensity of these paintings. And I was really trying to channel the textural aspect of this into my work. So I was working on this project when COVID hit or started to spread early last year. And I have a sleep condition called sleep paralysis, where you have these really intense kind of like hallucinatory nightmares that feel very real and you're physically paralyzed so you can't wake up from them. And when you do wake up, it's kind of confusing what was real and what wasn't. And at the time, I wasn't making any new work when COVID was starting to spread. And I had really strong anxiety, and my nightmares were just happening a lot more than they had been before. And I remember at that time feeling like there was almost like an abrupt break in my life. Like there was all of my past as one thing, and then entirely cut from the present moment, which felt completely new and difficult to navigate. And so I was thinking a lot about memory, dreams, and dissociated states. And because I wasn't making new work, I started looking back over my archives of work I've made over the last few years. And there were a lot of images that at the time I didn't really think were very worth anything. But once I put them all together, it felt like they were really talking to each other. And I was also writing a lot of prose, and saw in the prose that I was writing, there was kind of similar imagery in my writing that was appearing in my archival photos. So I put it all together into this zine called The Dust That Made You. Until my skull aches, I stare at the skies when we were born. My religion is the grand cross in your natal chart. I worship the dust that made you. I wonder how far our meteor will fall, how violently the earth will break when it hits. I cover your eyes and plot the future in drops of blood on the pillow. Maybe our bones will find each other 20,000 years from now, or later if you want. The earth tilts, a light grazing, your fingers to my femur. More recently, I've been very influenced by performance artists, especially Ana Mendieta. And this is from her project called Untitled People Looking at Blood, where she would have blood seep out from under the door of where she was living in Iowa City, and she would film people's reactions. So these are stills from the Super 8 film that she used to film people. And most of their reactions were to kind of look at it and move on, or investigate it and move on, or just kind of ignore it and move on. And I find this project so fascinating and brilliant because in this, and in a lot of performance art, these passersby are become participants in the art. She really makes them bystanders to some kind of possible horror that had happened and incorporates them into a storyline. She's really creating a new world just using the ingredients of everyday life. And I was just very inspired by this piece and other work of Mendieta's, where she has a way of pulling people into her work as participants in the story that she's making. So as COVID continued, I continued to have the sleep paralysis nightmares and also insomnia. So when I was sleeping, I had nightmares. When I was awake, I was sleep deprived. And I was spending a lot of time mentally in sort of this in-between state between reality and not reality. And I felt like I was kind of losing my grip a little bit. But images started coming to my mind in a sort of fugue state, like when I would wake up before I get out of bed, or before I'd fall asleep, or in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep. And so I was getting all these ideas for images that I would like quickly jot down in my phone notes document or on a piece of paper or something. And I wanted to make images that would describe the state of suspension that I was feeling at that time, like not knowing if something is reality or a dream, or being fully awake or asleep. And I wanted to create a visual world based on this sensation and pull the viewer in with me as a participant. And this feeling, this sort of in between state that I was in, as I started to make more work and look at it, it felt like a visual metaphor in some ways for the processing of trauma. The sleep paralysis nightmares I have usually replay the memory of the traumatic thing that had happened to me. And so for all these years when I didn't remember it, I would still dream about it. And I just didn't know that that dream was a thing that had actually happened. And so that kind of in itself is the suspended state between forgetting and remembering. So I felt like these images, which have a sense of suspension in them between waking and sleeping, could be a visual metaphor for how the brain processes trauma, at least from my experience. And when I make these images, I approach it like I'm making a short silent film where I'm both the actor and the director. So in front of the camera, I try to drop, especially because I photograph myself in these images. And so I drop into this mental state that feels very psychological and performative, and is as close as I can get to the emotions that I'm trying to convey in the images. And then when I'm behind the camera and in editing, I switch back into more of like a detached and critical and directorial mode. And it's such an interesting process because I'm in front of the camera, so I don't actually know what the shot is really going to look like until afterwards. And so it really does feel like making a movie where I'm playing all of the different roles. And I wanted to photograph familiar objects as though they were unfamiliar, in some way threatening. I just wanted these images to really look and feel like the dreams I was having. And the title of this project, Perceptual Isolation, it comes from a type of sensory deprivation where instead of muting all the senses, you overwhelm one sense and it kind of mutes all of the others. And this is really how this time period felt for me. Like my anxiety was just so overwhelming that it kind of muted my other emotions. When I make these images, I think a lot about the idea of a viewer, both the viewer of the photograph as an object, but also the person or people whose perspective I'm trying to embody with the camera. So especially when I photograph myself, I imagine that the camera is the perspective of a real person who's in the scene with me. And I try to mimic the human eye through like a very limited kind of close up, even at times voyeuristic perspective. And in doing this, and by trying to make the photos look as much like someone's, what you would see through your eyes as possible, the goal is then for the viewer of the photograph to kind of be pulled into the scene as a participant or observer, bystander in whatever's happening in the image. I'm often told that my images have what some people have called a serial killer vibe, which which I really appreciate. And I think there's something to that, because I think a lot of my images are not inherently violent, but there's definitely an implication of violence that I'm playing with visually. I try to create a sense of suspense in my images, and part of how I do that is by trying to imply that something had just happened and or is about to happen. And I do this through body language, through light, and the physical perspective of the camera. And especially in this image, trying again, like I mentioned earlier, to mimic the human eye and create a very limited voyeuristic perspective using the built environment. I photograph pretty much only inside of my apartment. So using these smaller spaces to frame shots and frame my camera. Something that has been really powerful for me, both personally and artistically, has been to read the work of the trauma specialist and psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, which he's a phenomenal researcher and thinker and writer about trauma and psychology. And what's interesting is his research has found that traumatic memory often imprints itself in parts of the brain that aren't always very accessible to cognition, meaning you don't always remember a lot of the details of what happened, but it does imprint in the parts of the brain that are very active during sleep, which I found was so fascinating, because I had started this project of using like sleeplessness and images about sleep and nightmares and waking to describe trauma. And then it turns out there's some scientific basis to that, which I thought it was just very lovely for me to read about. And so, like I mentioned earlier, that I would get these ideas for photos in the middle of the night and add them to my notes app on my phone. And then I would wake up the next morning and look at these notes and be like, what am I trying to tell myself? Because they would be like in the middle of the night. And so I know my work is, pretty serious and dark. So I thought I'd pull back the curtain on the creative process and show a little bit of the more lighthearted genesis of a lot of these images by sharing verbatim the notes from the ideas for images as they came to my mind. So some of the real bangers in this list are soapy face covered in soap, something with long skinny spoons, hunched over a bag, putting things in it, beans, counting them, I don't know. Lying in bed under the lights, night looking over shoulder, AF up at ceiling with white makeup on, creepy sweet potatoes. I put these all together and thought it was just so amusing, and maybe I'll make something with these for prose. But I'm continuing to work on this project, making new images, making prose, and working on a book project of it. So I just want to thank again LACP for hosting us, to Aline for leading this class and providing such wonderful feedback on this project, to my friends Anto, Ezra, Gabe, Kevin, and Sam, who I don't know if any of them are here, but I think they've all been so wonderful with giving me feedback on the prose and images. And I want to thank the whole Year of Not Knowing group, and of course my family, for being wonderful and full of wonderful love and ideas. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Kat. That was really fantastic. And your descriptions and articulation of the project was really stellar. What can I say? We all wish we were you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, so next up and last for the evening is Andy House. I have to just be straight up. Andy lives a block away from me, so it was so fun when we figured that out, when he started taking classes with me, that we shared common ground. Andy is a visual artist and photographer based in Los Angeles. His practice focuses on the act of observation as a quantitative phenomenon and considers the reproductibility of time and space. I should have practiced that. Recently, he has
create
ventured
the catalog file somewhere else. It automatically created it down in the pictures folder on your computer. So you can always.
Thank you. Recently, he has ventured into creating fictional moments by cutting people out of his photographs to transpose them into different places and times. I think we all actually mentally feel like we are experiencing that in real life. He received a BS degree in business at the University of Southern California and an MA degree in communications at Michigan State University. After a significant career in television and film production, including 3.5 years spent overseas in Hong Kong and then Moscow, Russia, Andy returned to his photographic practice in Los Angeles. His work has been featured in a solo exhibition at El Centro de Pueblo in Los Angeles and in multiple group exhibitions on the West Coast. His work has also been featured by National Geographic. Andy has published multiple monographs, A Celebration of Echo Park in Photographs, Union Station in Motion, Around Rajasthan, and most recently, Exploring Moments. And it's been so fantastic watching Andy's evolution as an art photographer, seeing how he really considers space, time, and breaking up the figure. And I think you'll really enjoy his lecture, as he has also an amazing life history. So welcome, Andy House. And you have to unmute yourself, Andy.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Aline, and everything you've done for us. I will see if I can make this screen share now. And my journey into photography started with travel photography. When I decided I wanted to continue making photographs at home in Los Angeles, it moved to street photography. And then it found its way into fictional or maybe fantasy photography. This is the path it followed. Brentwood, California in the 1950s and early 60s was an idyllic place and time to grow up. My parents subscribed to Life magazine, the Saturday Evening Post, and National Geographic, and I'd page through every new issue, marveling at the photographs, and they were my initial inspiration of what a photograph should look like. And I loved Norman Rockwell's illustrations, his sense of humor, and his irony. My father was a pilot. He had been around the world, and I dreamed of traveling around the world and seeing the things he'd seen. He was also a hunter. The first time I followed him out at dawn to hunt deer, we were in St. George, Utah, and I was 6 years old. He had a plane, and we'd fly into remote airstrips that looked more like bumpy dirt roads than runways. It was a little scary, but my old man was a great pilot. He learned to fly in biplanes and ended his career in 747s. Years later, while sitting in a small boat at sunrise, waiting for something to pass by on the mirror-like black water of Brazil's Rio Negro, I realized it was a similar experience and feeling to that of hunting deer with my dad. We would go out at dawn and find a good place to sit overlooking a game trail and wait for the game to pass by. Likewise, walking the streets of downtown Los Angeles, looking for special moments to photograph, is in some ways similar to game hunting. In my freshman year at college, I met Sharon Wilkinson. She was majoring in painting. I didn't even know you could major in painting. We started going out, and she introduced me to the world of abstract art and art appreciation. Watching Sharon work through a series of paintings was a revelation to me. She'd bring a painting home and then another, a variation on the first, and another, a variation on the second. And about the time I really started liking the series, she'd start working on something completely different. I loved watching that process. I took my first photography classes while in college at USC and saw photography as a possible vehicle for me to express my own vision. When I discovered The Family of Man, it changed my conception of what photography could be. It included so many extraordinary photographs, it rocked me with a desire to one day attempt to make images like those Edward Steichen selected for his exhibition. In my junior year of college, I figured out how to get into the Screen Extras Guild in order to pay my college living expenses. Working as an extra was my first experience watching how movies were made. It got me thinking maybe I could work in the movies someday. I started taking documentary film classes in USC's cinema department. Then, by some serendipitous alignment of the stars, a movie called The Graduate came out and became an iconic and huge hit. Ford, the car company, was searching Hollywood for a Dustin Hoffman lookalike to make a TV commercial takeoff on The Graduate, and I became the 21-year-old virgin anti-hero in America's world of TV advertising and made a dozen commercials between LA and New York while still an undergraduate. The commercial work gave me a better vantage point to watch the filmmaking process, and the residual checks afforded my tuition at USC and paid for a lawyer to keep me out of Vietnam. With the changing times, I didn't want to make TV commercials anymore. I wanted to do something that was relevant. I had grown up in LA and spent some time working in New York, but now I wanted to find the real America and followed the advice of Simon and Garfunkel. Let us be lovers, we'll marry our fortunes together. Michigan seems like a dream to me now. And we walked off to look for America. So Sharon and I got married and we went to Michigan State University for graduate school, where I got a job working on a local PBS station, working on documentary films for a TV show called On Assignment. It was one of the best jobs I ever had, but after 2 years living in East Lansing, I fled its frigid, wind-driven winters to look for work in Los Angeles. After graduate school, I spent a little time with a retired photographer, Nat Farbman. Farbman had had a long and illustrious career working at National Geographic and Life magazine and had 2 photographs in The Family of Man. He told me stories about what it was like to work on assignments for National Geographic. They'd give him a dozen rolls of film and send him off around the world to bring back a 5-page photo essay for the magazine. I never forgot those stories, and harbored a passionate desire to fly around the world with a camera to photograph foreign peoples in foreign places. Occupationally, I dreamed of a job making documentaries that dealt with the important issues of the times. But in reality, I was associate producer on a TV show called Thrill Seekers and worked on films about daredevils doing death-defying stunts. Eventually, I found my way into the Directors Guild of America, working as an assistant director and a career in film production management, working on somebody else's vision. As an assistant director, it was my job to organize and manage the flow of people and things to come in front of the camera. Consequently, I spent a large part of my day standing next to the camera because it was the best place to manage and run the set. It was also a great place to watch how camera setups and lighting setups were created. Stan Winston, with the gray hair on the left, was a 3-time Academy Award winner for creature effects on Terminator, Aliens, and Jurassic Park. He was the director of Pumpkinhead, and I was his first AD. Everybody in the business has to do at least one horror picture, and Pumpkinhead was mine. There was a time in the midst of raising a family and building a career, I feared my dream of traveling the world to investigate unknown mysteries was impossibly out of reach. After 15 years working as an assistant director and production manager, I joined the corporate ranks of studio management and climbed the ladder to senior vice president of TV production. Sony sent me to live in Hong Kong to supervise their production across Eastern Asia and Australia. During the 52 weeks I lived there, I flew out of Hong Kong 34 times. My flights were bound for Beijing, Shanghai, Kunming, Lijiang, Xi'an, Fuzhou, Taipei, Mumbai, Bangkok, Chiang Mai, Siem Reap, Hanoi, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Bali, Sydney, and Brisbane. This immersive experience in Oriental Asia opened a new world for me, and I rediscovered my interest in photography as a means of documenting my boyhood dream come true. Upon returning to LA and the workaday grind of keeping up with multiple productions, spending millions of dollars a week, my camera went back into the closet only to reappear during my annual vacations. In 2007, Sony Pictures sent me to live and work in Moscow, Russia. I was there 2.5 years, and during that time, I became more serious about photography. On weekends, I'd walk the streets of Moscow with my camera, pursuing Soviet statues symbolizing the rise of the proletariat and the famous Russian domes and the iconography of its Orthodox churches. After retiring from TV production, I enrolled in the photography department at Santa Monica College. One of my instructors, Ed Mangus, looked at my work and said, "You've been around the world and taken some beautiful photos, but you've got to learn how to shoot people." It was Ed who introduced me to street photography and the inspiration of Henri Cartier-Bresson and his decisive moment. With my new semi-retirement freedom and 3.5 million airline miles accumulated traveling around the world for Sony, I was able to chase my boyhood dream with a purpose. Inspired by the romance of Rudyard Kipling's stories and the adventures of my father, I chased Cartier-Bresson's moment around the world, and that's when I found the path to my creative expression through travel photography. Back in LA, I had a new challenge. Without the inspiration of unfamiliar peoples and cultures, I had to find something I was interested in photographing. Falling back on my documentary roots from college, I created a photo documentary on Echo Park and had a solo exhibition at El Centro del Pueblo in Echo Park. 6 years later, about 50 of my photos are still hanging in the main halls of El Centro del Pueblo. While most traditional documentary and street photographers shoot in black and white, the primary colors of David Hockney and film director Pedro Almodovar have always inspired me. My vision comes in red, green, blue, and yellow. Additionally, I've worked on 2 long-term projects, one on the Santa Monica Pier and the other on Union Station. Upon leaving Santa Monica College, I sought out the queen of LA's street photography, Julia Dean, and joined her street photography program, and then discovered the community of photographers, instructors, and students assembled by Julia and Brandon Gannon at the Los Angeles Center of Photography. Now, I'm lucky to have my inspiration renewed and re-energized regularly by that LACP community of photographers. Several years ago, at one of Aline Smithson's personal projects exhibitions, I came across a photograph made by Sharon Johnson Tennant that stopped me cold. I'd been tiring of the sameness of my street photography and was looking for another way to examine a moment. It took me a few months to make the break, but once it happened, I didn't make an exposure at a shutter speed of more than 1/15 of a second for almost a year. Sharon's work got me thinking about what motion blur does to a moment. My objective was to smear and extend one moment into the next moment. Last year, in Aline's personal projects class, she had us exploring the creation of diptychs and triptychs, and I came across a way of breaking a photograph into small columns. By breaking images into narrow columns, I found I could highlight and emphasize the parts of the image that were most interesting to me. I was introduced to Cubism and Dora Maar while in college, and I asked Sharon something like, "So what's the deal with Picasso and those jumbled up faces?" As memory serves me, she explained he was exploring the use of multiple perspectives in one image to create a different way to look at things. Cubism in motion, as portrayed by Marcel Duchamp's Nude Descending the Staircase, has intrigued me since the first time I saw it while in college. Later, when introduced to Edward Muybridge's motion pictures, it brought back the memory of Duchamp, and I was further intrigued. Decades later, their work inspired me to attempt my own version of a nude descending the staircase for a Photoshop final class project. My series of still life motion pictures is an outgrowth of that Photoshop exercise. It is a way to show several moments of movement across a single frame. One impatient little boy crossing Union Station with his mother became 4 impatient little boys. Looking for another project concept, once again I turned to David Hockney for inspiration. This time it was his Polaroids, or joiners as he calls them, where he was creating a single image from multiple exposures to examine time and motion in a way reminiscent of Cubism. Carlo Rovelli, a quantum physicist, describes time in mathematical terms as something that crumbles as we move through it. He calls the phenomenon the crumbling of time. This series of images is my conceptualized vision of Rovelli's crumbling time. I had been looking for a way to use a process of breaking up photographs into little squares, kind of like Hockney's joiner effect. And I combined the idea of time crumbling with disintegrating little squares to show my subjects movement across time. A French artist I tripped over while following a lens scratch link is the source of my latest inspiration. Catherine Belay has a wonderful, quirky point of view and has been influenced by David Hockney's joiners and Picasso's Cubism. She creates her unique cubistic images by layering a dozen or more photographs to find the effect she is after. Catherine Belay inspired me to create my own stories that I call fictional moments. And as it turned out, the timing was unfortunately fortuitous, because it wasn't long after I started work on the series that we were confronted by our year of not knowing, by our COVID pandemic. For the most part, my fictional moments are constructed out of my street photography archives and allow me to create my stories while sitting in the bubble of my house, searching through photos I made over the past 8 years. I'm altering real moments by making characters out of the people in my photographs, by cutting them out and transposing them into different places with different people in different times to create my stories. My work is a complete break with the protocol of street photography, but in the context of my series, I am writing fiction. The process moved from one of hunting for moments on the street to searching for images in my archives and conceptualizing a composition that might bring my fantasy alive. I'm bending moments into something else, something that I find interesting or maybe amusing, or maybe disturbing. Mother told me never to go under the pier. Finding his rainy day groove. You can't go in there from here. Same time every morning. Union Station Beach. My grandson likes to watch the little men surf in the fountain. A hula hoop march. Four glowing wheels, one man. Moving forward, I'm interested in finding ways to work with multiple overlaid exposures, both in camera and in post-production. I'd like to find my version of the colors and moods Catherine Belay creates in her work. It won't surprise any of my LACP friends when I say much of the new work I've created over the last 2 years would not have been made without the encouraging push and inspiration of Aline Smithson. Thank you for that, Aline.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Andy, so much. What a wonderful presentation. And, you know, this is just an example of the power of photography, how we're all making work in different ways, and we all have stories to tell and things to explore. And that's why I love this field. Photography is truly a universal language that everyone can speak. We don't need text to go with it. But I am so grateful for these artists sharing their work tonight. And I want you to just all think really hard right now and ask one question of these artists in the chat, because they would love to have a second to answer you and talk about their work a little bit more. So, but thank you all for your wonderful comments. I hope that Kat and Andy have a chance to look at the chat. So I am just, I guess, I'll just ask a few questions since I'm not really getting much. Kat, I mean, of course, when I saw your shower image, I immediately thought of Psycho, and I'm wondering if you have been influenced by Hitchcock or by this incredible noir. I mean, we live in Los Angeles. I feel like we live in a noir world. If that has been an influence in your art making.
Yeah, I think, you know, I actually had not seen that many noir films before making this, but I think culturally it is just synced into my brain. And when I was setting up the lights, I was trying to make all these photos and I felt like they just didn't have any resonance. And it's just like anything in photography where light is absolutely everything. And so I was just trying to position my flash in different ways. And it just turned out a lot of times that having bright flash in a small room creates that kind of noir lighting with really stark shadows. And I really embraced it. I wanted to have sort of a 1950s look where it's really bright, and my skin, especially for the self-portraits, is really, really bright, but there's still a lot of detail. So I'll usually have a very bright flash with like a very tiny aperture, like f of 16 to 22. But actually, since making this work, I've started to watch more noir films. Like I recently watched Vertigo, and the lighting, I was like, that's exactly what I'm going for. So I'm trying to watch more and catch up and have more of an education in it. But it's definitely in my mind, and I think more culturally than something I was really studying when I started making the work.
So we have a question could you speak more about the fictionalization of your images?
Um,
No, not you, Andy. Kat.
sorry.
I'll jump back to you in a minute.
But I feel like Andy would actually be a good person to answer that too. So maybe we can both
Yeah,
answer it. Yeah.
absolutely. Because his is fictional moments.
Yeah, totally. I feel like we're both, Andy and I both like have started in documentary and have kind of moved into playing with reality in our own ways. I don't know. That's actually a tough question to answer because I think what I'm trying to go for is emotional resonance. And so then everything else is kind of in some way fictionalized to get at more emotional truth. I know that sounds very paradoxical, but I think because a lot of times I'm trying to recreate dreams and nightmares and ideas, so there's already a lack of reality. So it's all kind of fiction, but I'm trying to get at like an emotional core that's real, if that makes sense. Like the real feelings of anxiety and suspension and fear, but in a package that's all kind of imagined scenes and moments and dreams.
You know, I think it would be really an interesting question to ask both of you, and maybe we'll start with Andy, is that Kat is right. You both started out sort of documentary or travel photography or making image of that is of what's in front of the lens. And you both now are making work that is more interior. And as a photographer, in some ways, which is more satisfying, like, and maybe what brought you to that way, that shift in making work? So Andy, I'm going to start with you.
You know, I think when you're doing good work, it's satisfying. I don't know that one's more satisfying than the other. Particularly, yeah, I have drifted away from street photography, but as I read was reading my presentation and my first look at the family of man and the quality of photographs and it, so I think when you have good work that's satisfying. For me, my primary objective in photography is to entertain myself, and I have been finding my latest series a, a good way to entertain myself, and I'm having fun.
I hope everyone takes that in, because I agree with Andy. The most important thing is to please yourself. And so bravo to that. And I'm just going to ask another question by Suda asked, Andy, do you see your images crumbling from their source into other forms, some time transformed due to space? Do you want me to read that again?
I don't know if I'll understand it any better if you read it again. I think that was really, I was focusing on time when I started moving from motion blur, and I went into that crumbling time series that I was doing. And, I was reading about quantum mechanics, quantum physics. Well, that was a silly thing for me to try to do. And I was looking at time more then. In the current work, I'm more finding images in my archives and going out and making some where I can shoot safely at the beach and finding ways to put them together in a way that the composition works and that I find amusing.
And Kat, how do you feel about your evolution from documentary to art photography?
I feel so much more at home in the work that I'm making. I don't think I could go back to straight documentary work. I always had a lot of baggage with a lot of the like certain dynamics of documentary that made me feel uncomfortable. I could never quite get over feeling predatory in a way. I've heard Alex South describe photography and documentary approaches as being kind of predatory. And I could never really get over that feeling, even when a lot of my documentary work was still very collaborative. When I was photographing people, I would work with them on the selection of images. I'd usually have them write text to go with it. We'd like work on the edit together, but even that still kind of felt like a little too much. And I would always hold myself back. So I just wasn't that good at it because I couldn't get over this dynamic. And I just like at a certain point, I think in documentary, a lot of times your interests as a photographer and the interests of the people you're photographing don't always add up. And so I just always felt really uncomfortable. But now working with myself and working in a world where I get to make my own rules, I really love that a lot. I'm enjoying it a lot more.
Yeah, and I actually thinking about it, the idea of predatory photography, only self-portraiture is the only non-predatory, because even when I create portraits and the person is fully engaged and standing in front of my camera, what they don't know is that what something took me 5 minutes to create, I will look at their image for the next 20 years, over and over and over. And I think that the people in front of our camera, and Andy is laughing because he so knows what this, we have caught our, we have hunted this person and we are now going to stare at them for the next 20 years. And they have no idea. And anyone that has ever stood in front of my camera, I feel like I am so connected to them as a human being, though they're not connected to me in the same way. So I think that's, I mean, self-portraiture, I think is the only, because we're, predatory photography can be landscape too. So,
Yeah.
I think self-portraiture is really the only safe space for.
Yeah. And it's like then all that energy that you would direct towards another person and the conflicts you would have in your head between what you want this person to do and maybe a desire for them to, be autonomous and push back. All that with self-portraiture, it all just happens for you inside of your brain. So it's just like more of like a lightning storm of
Right.
yourself. So I am very happy photographing myself and creepy sweet potatoes in my apartment and things like that. It feels like
we're so glad that you do. Well, I just want to say thank you both. It has been such a pleasure spending 2020 with you during the pandemic and with everyone else in the personal project. And we're so grateful again to Sally Field for just making us look so good. And I hope you get a chance to explore the website. If that book we showed is of any interest, you can order it on MagCloud and have your own copy for a very low sum. And really, truly, thank you for coming tonight. It's, as artists, we need support. We need people to show up. We need to learn from each other. And thank you for coming this evening, and continued successes to everyone. And I'm raising my wine glass to tomorrow.